All right, I think we are live. There we go. Now we're live. Aha! We're starting with verse 9. Boom. It's a little blinky today. That's okay. I think I'm still alive though. Let's move this back a little bit. There we go. Good morning, Austin. How you doing? Good morning, Chris. Is it the video blinking for you guys? It's blinking for me every once in a while. I think I might have just heard myself from the other room. Yep, my wife's got me on the Bluetooth speaker. Good morning, Aunt Julie. Okay, not cool. Might just be me. My hotspot might be rough. Oh wait, no, it's maybe. All right, maybe that was it. I don't know. Hi, Jason. Good morning, Tom. Yeah, this is an older laptop. I don't have fancy video making or streaming equipment. I'm pretty basic on my end. I mean, look at my home office. I need to get a green screen though, just so that like I can put myself in the temple or something like that. The audio is the important thing. As long as my audio is coming in good, we're good. All right, we're gonna give people about another minute. At 9:15, I'm gonna get going. What's going on down here? All right, I don't even know all that stuff. All right, Facebook did this mass upgrade to their live streaming thing, and there's all kinds of bells and whistles that I don't understand. My lens looks a little dirty. Which one of these is the... No, that must be Mike's. Can you turn that Bluetooth speaker down a little bit, Becky? It's starting to... Hearing myself on the time delay is a little distracting. All right, it's 9:15. I'm going to open some prayer. We're going to get going. Heavenly Father, thank you for today. Father, I thank you for Sunday school. I'm looking forward to this all week. And I just pray you give us wisdom. Father, help us to understand your word in such a way that it's not just about getting new knowledge, Father, but that we can walk away here knowing a little bit better how to walk in this world like your Son, and that we would be more like him. Father, I pray these things in Christ's name. Amen. Okay. We're picking up here in Hebrews chapter 6, verse 9. Okay, so the author of Hebrews has been walking everybody through the elementary doctrines of the gospel, and specifically Christ's relationship. Like, what does it look now that we are the life of faith is a life that is following the teachings of Christ, as opposed to the life of faith being a life that is faith in the law. All right, and the author pointed out in chapter 5 that it's heavy stuff, and we got a lot to talk about. And we're going to try to do that. All right, and we're going to try to keep going a little bit deeper. And we're not going to go over all of the elementary aspects of the gospel again, because in the case of the apostate, it doesn't matter. They're not saved, they're not going to be saved. But the author here says in verse 9, though we speak in this way, because he just got done talking about the apostates, who it's pointless to talk about the elementary things of the gospel with, because they can't get saved anyway. Yet in your case, beloved, we feel sure of better things that belong to salvation. And so, I don't worry too much about what that first part of Hebrews chapter 6 is talking about, because the author even says to the people that he's writing to, we don't believe this about you guys. We don't believe that you guys are apostates. We do not believe that it is pointless for us to talk about this, because we believe that you guys are saved, or we believe that you guys are experiencing the gospel. All right. And he says, verse 10, for God is not unjust so as to overlook your work and the love that you've shown for his name in serving the saints, as you still do. And we desire each one of you to show the same earnestness, to have the full assurance of hope until the end, so that you may not be sluggish, but imitators of those who through faith and patience inherit the promise. And so he just got done, like we were talking about the apostates, and then he brought up the whole basically parable of the sower thing. And the author's saying to this group of believers who, remember, up until now, he's already mentioned the hard heart, okay? And then and he kind of alluded to the thorny soil. And so we've already covered like the hard heart and the hidden hard heart and the thorny soil. And he's saying, you guys, we think that you guys are the good soil, and that that you heard the gospel, you responded to the gospel, and that you're living a life that's going to bear fruit at some point. And so he's encouraging this audience that, we don't think that you guys are the hard heart. We don't think that you're the apostate. We don't think that your life is full with the heart is full with the worldly things of the thorns and the thistles. We don't think there's a hidden hard heart in there. We think that you guys are good soil and that the gospel is going to produce fruit in your life. All right. And you've heard it, and you've been living it out. And he hits the whole love God, love people, because he says you guys have, you've shown love for his name and serving the saints, and that we have full assurance of hope at the end, that you guys are going to bear fruit. Okay. But he's encouraging them to continue on and not being sluggish, but imitators of those who through faith and patience inherited the promise. All right. And I think he's talking about, like, we had this look so far up through chapter 5. The authors kept reminding them of the people who, they reject the teachings of angels and were judged. They rejected the teachings of Moses and were judged. They followed Joshua into the promised land, but they didn't live the life that Joshua lived, so they didn't enter into the rest. And he's been kind of looking at the negative examples, okay? But now we're going to start moving, and we're going to start heading towards some more positive examples. And so he's saying, look, even though back then there were people, though, that listened to the revelation of angels and they were blessed. There were people that listened to the teachings of Moses that were blessed. There were people who went into the promised land, and they didn't just enter into that inheritance, but they also entered into God's rest. Okay? And saying, you guys, instead of imitating those negative examples, you guys imitate those positive examples that we've had in the past. And he's immediately going to jump in, and again, we're going to look at the classic one of Abraham. Okay, so verse 13. All right, and so here's we're transitioning, and we're going to be looking at examples of faithful individuals of the past, and then relating them to Christ and relating them to the present audience. And this is all going to be heading towards chapters 11 and 12 and 13, where we're going to be kind of wrapping up we're done looking at the past. Now let's start transitioning to where you guys are at in the present and what that is going to look like. And so that's kind of where we are in the book. So we're still looking at the past, but we're going to do it in a more positive look. And we're going to get into some of the deeper and more complicated aspects of the doctrine of Christ. And as he is fulfilling the Old Testament offices of prophet, priest, and king, specifically priest, and what that looks like. And it's going to get a little deep. It's going to get a little heavy. But the author already warned us that was going to be the case. And so this is kind of the second section of the book that we're in right now. Okay? All right, so verse 13 of Hebrews chapter 6. Good morning, Alice. Good morning, Amy. All right, so we're in verse 13. For when God, and if you jump in, you don't know what verse we're on, just ask in the chat and someone will probably tell you. Verse 13. Oh, and Gene, you have my permission to get people riled up, so go ahead. If you're watching, you can do it. Verse 13. For when God made a promise to Abraham, since he had no one greater by whom to swear, he swore by himself, saying, surely I will bless you and multiply you. All right. And so he is now doing this thing where, like, we talked a lot about the law and its relation in the Levitical priesthood, okay? But now he is hooking on to this different aspect of Old Testament revelation between God and his people, all right? And he led into it in that verse 4:12, because he said, those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. This very much has to do with that beatitude of blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the land, that we talked about a little bit back before. Those that are patient through faith, they're going to inherit the promises that God has given. And so then, who is the person that God made a promise to and was patient and had faith and inherited it in a sense? Well, that's Abraham. Okay, and so we're going back to God's promise to Abraham that Abraham believed and was justified. All right. So verse 15. And thus Abraham, having patiently waited, attained the promise. And it was the promised son, through whom which Abraham was going to become a great nation. Okay? For people swear by something greater than themselves, and in all their disputes an oath is final for confirmation. Okay? So when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath, so that by two unchangeable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge may have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. We have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain, where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf, having become a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. All right. And so the author wasn't kidding when he said that he's got much to say about Jesus as a high priest, and he's going to get to some heavy stuff here. Okay. But he's saying, look, God, he wanted to enter into a covenantal agreement with Abraham. He made a promise to Abraham, but he wanted to kind of ratify this promise with legal oath. Okay, this idea of covenant. All right, and when you enter into a legal arrangement, you make an appeal towards some greater authority to kind of watch over that arrangement and guarantee it. Okay, like for us, when we enter into contractual arrangements, it's with the understanding that the government will enforce those. Our legal system will enforce those contractual arrangements. When the Old Testament, when you made an oath before God or the king or something like that. All right. And he's talking about in God's interactions with Abraham. When God made the oath with Abraham, he made it upon himself. All right. And this is something that, again, the author here assumes that the audience is very familiar with the Old Testament and how these things kind of work. So I'm going to give you the passage. I'm going to outline it real quick so you can check it out. But he's alluding to something in the book of Genesis, okay? And it has to do with God's formal entering into a covenant with Abraham, okay? And prior to this point, God had made the promise, but there hadn't been the symbolic covenant ceremony where you make it official. And you make it a covenant between the two of you and God, all right? And this is going to take place in the book of Genesis, and it's going to be in Genesis chapter 15. And you can read about this, all right? And again, the promise was made all the way back in 12, all right? That's when God called Abraham. But in 15, God renews the promise. He gives it more information. And he and Abraham have a covenant ceremony where they are officially entering into this covenant together. But what's interesting is, and you could go ahead and read it, but I'll give you the outline. They chose what was culturally the highest kind of official ceremony that you could make, and that they took all these animals, all right, and they cut them in half, and they laid them out, okay? And the plan was, the way this would work normally is, like if Abraham was going to make this covenant with, one of the kings of the region or that kind of thing, is they would lay out the terms of the covenant. All right, here's what I'm going to do, and here's what you're going to do. And they would put the animals out, they'd cut them in half, and then they would walk through those animals together. And it symbolized two things. One is this covenant's going to last until these animals can come back together again, aka forever, because that never happened. And if we break this covenant, then we'll become like these animals. We're going to be executed, okay? But what's interesting is if you look at the covenant, it's completely one-sided. It's God saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. There's nothing on Abraham. And when it comes time to walk through, God walks through by himself. And so God takes all of the covenant on himself because there's nobody greater for him to appeal to. And this is a covenant in which it is completely not dependent upon what Abraham does. All right. So, that's what the author of Hebrews here is. Like when you look and you examine the covenant relation with Abraham, it is completely one-sided. All Abraham has to do is follow God, and God is going to make sure that all these promises take place, and God swears it upon himself because there's nobody higher that you can swear it to. And so the author of Hebrews here, so we could rely on the fact in which God is faithful and God cannot lie. So if God says he's going to do this, he's going to do it. All right? And, okay, so we who have fled for refuge to God, we can hold fast to this hope because this promise that God made to Abraham, which we're part of, we looked at that a couple weeks ago, we are part of that promise, we're part of the fulfillment of that promise. We can have hope in that, and we can enter into the inner place behind the curtain. And so the author he's talking about the tabernacle, all right? And this is something that the book's going to get into in much greater detail, so we'll talk a little bit about it now. But you can go back in Exodus, and you can look at when God was giving the plans for the tabernacle after he gave the Ten Commandments in Exodus 22 and 23. Keep going, and I'll read about the tabernacle. And the tabernacle had three main sections, okay? So there was the court. So you had the tabernacle proper, which was a very fancy tent. And then there was this wall around that. And then inside the wall, there was the inner court. And that's where the basin for the ceremonial washings was. That was where the altar was, where the priest would actually put forth the sacrifice. Okay? And if you were an Israelite, and I think I understand this correctly, if I'm wrong, you guys can let me know. But if you were an Israelite, you could bring your sacrifice, and you could go into that inner court of the tabernacle, and you could give the sacrifice to the priests, and then the priest would offer on the altar, but you could be there and you could watch. But if you were a Joe Schmo Israelite, you were never going into that You were never going into that tent. You were never going into the tabernacle. Okay? Only the priests were going in. When you walked in, that tabernacle was actually separated into two sections. There was a larger section right inside the door, and then there was a smaller section in the back, and there was a curtain that blocked that off. And in that blocked off section, that is where the Ark of the Covenant would be. And when the tabernacle was in place, and after it had been erected, and that tent had been erected around the ark, and the ark had been put in there with the poles, so they could actually put the ark in there without entering, the glory of God would descend, and the glory of God would be inside that intersection, and that was the Holy of Holies. So the Holy Place was outside, and the Holy of Holies, or the holiest place, was inside over the tabernacle. Is the washing basin front tent? Probably the basis for Catholic holy water, probably. And the priest could go into the holy place, and in the holy place there was a lampstand, so there was lit. There was the altar of incense where they would burn incense every day, and there was the table of the showbread where they put the holy bread. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but and then the Holy of Holies, once a year, on the single day, the high priest and only the high priest, he could go in there to make atonement for the nation. And that was on the Day of Atonement. And so one man on one day of the year could go in there and stand in the presence of God. And even on that day, if he went in there unworthy, he would be struck down. Okay? But what the author here, what are the two unchangeable things? It is the fact that God made the promise upon himself, and that God cannot lie. As I believe is what he's talking about. So God made the promise, he took it upon himself. So that's God's word. And then God can't lie about that. And so the fact that God's nature is that he can't lie and he's faithful, and then he made a promise. So we can rest on these two things. Yeah, thank you, Chris. The author of Hebrews is saying that because Christ is our high priest, and because God is faithful to his promise and he can't lie, we have this sure and steadfast anchor to our soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain, where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf. So he's saying because of what Jesus did, and he's going to explain what Jesus did here in these next sections, okay? But he has he already talked about Jesus going into the holy place? Oh, I think we're going to get to it, okay? That because Jesus entered into the very presence of God, all right, on our behalf, in fulfillment of the promise, now we can experience the very presence of God, all right? And that's where we're going here in this next section, is Jesus doing this, okay, and us being able to experience it, okay? And so basically what he's going to do is the author is going to look at the Old Testament system and establish that what we had here on earth was a picture of what was going to take place in heaven. And he's going to walk through that. And what's really interesting is, as far as I can tell, it's this section of Hebrews is where we kind of have this picture of the heavenly ministry of Christ. You know, the Gospels give us the earthly ministry of Christ. What we're going to look at here is the heavenly ministry of Christ, both in his death and then in his present ministry. And it's going to be pretty fascinating, or I find it to be very fascinating. All right, so take a deep breath. We're going to start jumping in. All right, and things are going to get deep, and I'm going to try to walk us through it and try to do it in a way that keeps us very grounded, because there's this next chapter, chapter 7, some people take some of this stuff and get pretty wonky with it, okay? So he's saying, like, okay, look, here's how we can go into the presence of God, because we have a forerunner, Jesus Christ, okay? He's the fulfillment of the promise. He went into the holy place because he became a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. And all of a sudden now we got, what's going on here? The author's already previewed this. He's mentioned the fact that within the Psalms, there was a prophecy about the Messiah being the high priest after the order of Melchizedek. So what does this mean? What does this look like? How does this work? Well, let's start talking about it. Chapter 7, okay? Now, verse 7. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him. And to him, Abraham apportioned a 10th part of everything. Okay? And so, the author of Hebrews, in his explanation of what does it mean that Jesus Christ is the high priest of Melchizedek, is making reference to a historical event in the life of Abraham. The only historical event we have in the Old Testament featuring Melchizedek. Okay, and he summarizes it for us. Now you can read about this in the book of Genesis. Let me grab it for you real quick. But it's just going to be a more detailed explanation of the summary given here by the author of Hebrews. Okay, and it is in is it 17? Yeah, it's in 17. Okay, 14. It's not 17, 14. Genesis 14, 17, down through the end of the chapter. Okay, and so in this, Melchizedek, the king of Salem, brings out bread and wine, and it says that he was a priest of the God Most High. He blesses Abraham, and Abraham gives a tithe to Melchizedek. Okay, so who was Melchizedek? Well, he was the king of Salem, which was means peace, and it is the early name for Jerusalem. So he is the king of the city that will become Jerusalem, that will eventually become the capital city of Israel, the city of David, which means that he is, he's not a Jew because he is contemporary with Abraham, so there are no Jews yet. And later on, Jerusalem is identified as a Jebusite city, so it is possible the Jebusites took it over later, or it could be that the Melchizedek here was a Jebusite. He might have been a Canaanite, before a faithful Canaanite, before the Canaanites as a culture reached cultural or societal reprobation. Okay, so he's the king of Jerusalem, and he is a priest of the Most High God. So before there was a Jewish people, okay, back in the patriarchal age, where you had individual families who worshipped God, centered through the patriarch, God had a high priest. There was someone in the priestly office, and he was also a king, and he was Melchizedek. Okay, and that's what we got. All right, and then the author of Hebrews is going to play off this fact that we have a single historical account about this figure. Okay, and he says, in the remainder of verse 2, he is first by translation of his name. So apparently Melchizedek means something about being first. King of righteousness. And then he's also king of Salem. That is king of peace, because that's what Salem means. He is without father, mother, or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he continues a priest forever. Okay, and so what does this mean? And there's a lot of people who took this here and believe that what the author of Hebrews is indicating that Melchizedek was a pre-incarnate Christ. Does his Melchizedek name have a meaning in and of itself? I'm not sure exactly. I think this is one of those things that people discuss because let me look something up real quick. Usually when there's a clear meaning to a name or even an allusion to a name, the translators like to throw it out there for you. This is something I need to look up more. Yeah, I'll have to look it up and get back to you because I didn't before. But there may be something going on there. It probably means something about righteousness, actually, because that's what the author of Hebrews seems to be indicating. So that Melchizedek is a pre-incarnate Christ, and that Abraham actually met a pre-incarnate manifestation of the second person of the Trinity in Genesis chapter 14. I don't think that's what's going on here. I think that when he says that he's without father, mother, genealogy, is that we have no historical information within the book of Genesis. We have the genealogy of Abraham. We have the life and the death of Abraham. We don't have any of that about Melchizedek. And so I think the author is pointing out that that he resembles the Son of God. So he's not actually the Son of God. And that, it's Aramaic for King of Righteousness. Thank you. Yeah, go Jason. That it's just kind of pointing out that we don't know a lot about Melchizedek, but he exists. And the fact that he exists in the narrative is so that later on we can talk about the priesthood of Melchizedek. Okay? And it's establishing here that there is a priesthood of Melchizedek. And the author is going to use this account to establish the fact that the priesthood of Melchizedek is a higher priesthood or a greater priesthood or a more prestigious priesthood than the Levitical priesthood. Okay? And the first point of that is that it predates it. Okay? So before there ever was a Levitical priesthood, before Aaron was a gleam in his daddy's eye, to borrow an analogy that is going to come up a little bit later, is that there was God had a priesthood. God had a priest. It was Melchizedek, and there was an order of priesthood that Melchizedek belonged to that was named after Melchizedek. It's the Melchizedekian priesthood. It is a priesthood that predates the system of the law that existed back during the patriarchal era, contemporary with Abraham. See, I don't think that it does lean towards a Christophany, because no man is righteous in the sense of Christ's righteousness, but if you have faith in Christ and you are saved, you are righteous. Like you and I, if we have faith, and that faith is saving faith, and if we have confessed our sins, God is faithful and just to cleanse us to forgive us our sins and cleanse us of all of unrighteousness. Like we can be righteous. We have a sense of righteousness. This is the righteousness that Doug was talking about in the Beatitudes last week. The righteousness of righteousness before God. And so I think I don't think it was a Christophany, particularly because it says that he resembles the Son of God. And if he was resembling the Son of God, he can't be the Son of God. But I might be harping on that too much. And I think it's just taking that section too far. I think he is a Christophany, not in the sense of pre-incarnate Christ, but I think there's a way of using the term in a sense that he's an Old Testament figure that is a type of Christ. Kind of like Samuel was, in that Samuel occupied the Old Testament office of prophet, priest, and king all at the same time. Or he was the patriarchal role before there was a kingship, in the same way that Christ was going to do that later. So I think Melchizedek, in that he is a priest of the Most High God, his name is King of Righteousness, and he is the King of Salem, which is the King of Peace, the King of Jerusalem. And I think it's looking forward to the Davidic Messianic King and all that kind of stuff. I might be completely wrong. And that this actually is a pre-incarnate Christ. But then I think it'd be weird that he's a pre-incarnate. He must have been hanging around for a while if he was the king of Jerusalem. Like, it wasn't just like when God showed up for Sodom and Gomorrah, where he just shows up. This would have been a very long-standing pre-incarnate manifestation of Christ that was like living a life of like, he was there doing things. I don't know. I think he is a type of Christ in the same way that we have Old Testament figures who represent what the Messiah is going to be like later. But I don't think that he was a pre-incarnate Christ. But he might have been. This is just where I'm leaning on this one. But he, as an individual, is going to be very important for our discussion because he is a king who is occupying a priestly office that is going to be the priestly office that Jesus is going to occupy. And that's what the author is talking about right here. And so we already saw early in the book that prophecy was given through David in the Psalms that Jesus was going to be a priest, but he was not going to be a Levitical priest. He was going to be a priest of the order of Melchizedek. Okay? And so the order of Melchizedek, it predated the Levitical order. Okay? Because he was contemporary with Abraham. Okay? So even during the patriarchal age, when the patriarchs were occupying the authority position of kingship or patriarchal or pastoral rule, they were the prophets. Okay? Abraham was a prophet. That's what God said to Abimelech. And they were occupying the role of the priesthood, in that Abraham was the one making sacrifices and offerings. Job was making sin sacrifices for his family. Even at that time, where all the offices were still kind of occupied in one individual, God had a priest, like someone who was a priest in the way that Abraham wasn't a priest. Okay? Because this guy was a priest, he shows up, he blesses Abraham, and Abraham gives him a tenth, which later on is what Israel's going to do with their priesthood. They're going to show up, the priesthood's going to bless them, and they're going to give them a tenth. All right? So even when Abraham was acting like a priest for himself and his family, there was a priesthood that was greater than that patriarchal priesthood. And that's the Melchizedekian priesthood. All right, so verse 4 of Hebrews chapter 7, okay? See how great this man was, to whom Abraham the patriarch gave a tenth of the spoils, okay? And those descendants of Levi who received the priestly office have a commandment in the law to take tithes from the people, that is, from their brothers, because these also are descended from Abraham. And so, again, he's making these connections between the different priesthoods. So, when Melchizedek came down from Salem to bless Abraham in the victory God gave him, Melchizedek blessed Abraham and said, "Blessed be Abraham, and blessed be God of Abraham, God Most High." Abraham responded to this by giving to Melchizedek a tenth. And we don't. There's not a lot of history here, but I'm guessing that Abraham, having been in this area, knew about Melchizedek already. Knew Melchizedek's ministry, knew Melchizedek's role, and so when Melchizedek, in his role of priest of the Most High God, came down to bless Abraham and bless God with Abraham, it was Abraham did the appropriate thing and offered him a tenth. Yep, that's true too. And he's pointing, the author of Hebrews is pointing out that this is a thing that people do with priests. The Levitical priesthood was commanded to take tithes from the people. Okay, the people of Israel were supposed to take a tenth. All right, and they were to give it to the Levites. Okay, it was of the 3 Old Testament tithes. There was 2 yearly tithes and 1 tithe every 3 years. One of the yearly tithes was supposed to go to Levites. Okay, and then the Levites were supposed to take a tenth of that and actually give it right to the priests. And so that way, the Levites didn't have to work and the priests didn't have to work. All right, and so the author is pointing out this is something that happens with priesthoods, and the Levitical priests, they were to take it from their brothers. They were to take it from their contemporaries. They were all descendants of Abraham. Okay? The Levitical priests got the tithe not because their descendants or their father or their ancestry was greater. It was the same. They were taking tithes from someone who had the same ancestry, but it was because of what God commanded. But, verse 6, this man who does not have his descent from them received tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. Okay? So he's saying, look, Melchizedek was not a descendant of Abraham. He was not a descendant of Levi. Okay? He wasn't taking tithes because he was part of the Levitical priesthood. All right? He has no descent from Abraham. And not only did he receive tithes, he blessed Abraham. The king of Salem came down and he offered his blessing on Abraham. All right? And Abraham had the promise. Abraham was in a covenant relationship with God himself. All right? And Melchizedek can come down and he can bless Abraham and he can receive tithes from Abraham. He can bless Abraham and he can receive tithes from Abraham, the man who God has called and entered into a personal covenant relationship with. Okay? And verse 7, it is beyond dispute that the inferior is blessed by the superior. All right? In the one case, tithes are received by mortal men, but in the other case, by one who it is testified that he lives. One might even say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him. So, and again, this is that whole lesser to the greater. All right, he's not saying that Abraham is inferior in the sense that he's an inferior human being, but he is inferior to Melchizedek if Melchizedek is blessing him and Abraham is paying tithes to him. All right, and so if Abraham, the friend of God in the covenant relationship with God, the one who's received the promises, if he is receiving blessing from Melchizedek and he is paying tithes to Melchizedek, then the Melchizedekian priesthood is a priesthood to which Abraham himself submitted to. All right? It was a priesthood that was over even Abraham. Okay? And so the Levitical priesthood, being a priesthood that comes from Abraham, therefore is also underneath the Melchizedekian priesthood. And the author says that you might even say that Levi paid tithes to Melchizedek because he was in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him. All right, and so this is another one of those passages that people take this and they really run with it. Okay, what is he talking about? And again, I think the author here is saying that you could look at it this way. He isn't saying that that there was some substance of the person of Levi within Abraham that participated in the giving of tithes to Melchizedek. I don't think he's saying that. But I think what he's saying is that Abraham, in giving of tithes to Melchizedek, in a way was representative of his entire ancestry submitting to Melchizedek in a particular way. And so again, he's establishing the fact that, okay, look, the Levitical priesthood gets its prestige or an authority or whatever it is through Abraham. And Abraham is receiving blessings and giving tithes to Melchizedek. And it's acknowledging the fact that the Melchizedekian priesthood is a priesthood that overshadows Abraham. And if it covers Abraham, it also covers Levites. And it makes sense, okay? Because the Levitical priest was not saved because of what he was doing. He was saved because of what Christ was going to do. He was saved because of his Melchizedekian high priest. And that's the argument that the author's making here, okay? The Levitical priesthood had its role, but the Levitical didn't save anybody. It was the Melchizedekian priesthood that was going to save people someday. And so even the high priest of the Levites, he had a high priest of the order of Melchizedek that was going to be coming later. And this is typified or given us a picture of it in Abraham and Melchizedek, the high priest of God Most High, okay? And so there is a priesthood that is over all the people of God, over the Levitical priesthood. And the work of the Levitical priesthood points to what that Melchizedekian priesthood is going to do that will ultimately bring salvation to God's people. And we're going to walk through the specifics of that through the rest of the book. Okay? So, all that to say, I don't think Melchizedek was Jesus. And I don't think there was some mystical way in which Levi, the personhood of Levi, was present inside the personhood of Abraham at that time of Abraham's life. Okay? But it has to do with these ideas of representative headship, federal headship that we see throughout all of Scripture. Okay? That Melchizedek was a figure who was a precursor of the ministry of Christ, like other people in the Old Testament. And then Abraham stands in representation of his whole ancestry and the people of God, including us. And so there was a day in which Melchizedek blessed Abraham, and Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek. And in that day, Melchizedek blessed the people of God through Abraham, and Abraham, the people of God through Abraham, paid tithe to Melchizedek. And in that way, Christ, the ultimate high priest, blessed the people of God, and the people of God paid tithes to Christ. And we're going to look at the rest of this as we go. And the author is going to continue this argument between the Levitical priesthood and the Melchizedekian priesthood. Okay, so I'm going to pause here for a second and double check, but I think I'm caught up on the chat. And is that kind of making sense to everybody? Like, kind of where he's going here? Like, what the author of Hebrews is doing with the historical figure of Melchizedek and relating it to the system of law that we've been talking about to help us understand Christ's ministry and how we relate to it. That's what we're doing here. Because what the author's going to, he's going to keep going on this theme of the Melchizedekian priesthood versus the Levitical priesthood, but then he's going to get into Christ's ministry as our Melchizedekian high priest in a way that I think is unique to the book of Hebrews. Okay. All right. I think I think my wife's paying attention, so she'd probably tell me if this whole thing dropped. So we're going to keep going, okay? Verse 11 of Hebrews chapter 7. Okay, so I'm in Hebrews 7:11. Now, if perfection had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need would there have been for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek, rather than the ones named after the order of Aaron? For when there is a change in the priesthood, there's necessarily a change in the law as well. For the one of whom these things are spoken belonged to another tribe, from which no one has ever served the altar. For it is evident that our Lord was descended from Judah, and in connection with the tribe of Moses said nothing about priests. Okay? And so, you see, like reminding us that Christ came from the tribe of Judah. He was not a Levite. Okay, nothing in the law of Moses said anything about anybody in Judah being priests. Okay? Wasn't going to happen. All right? And so the Melchizedekian priesthood predated the Levitical priesthood. Then once the Levitical priesthood was there, David in the Psalms gave prophecy that the Messiah was going to be a priest after the order of Melchizedek. So there was Old Testament prophecy saying the order of Melchizedek was going to come back. And so the author said, okay, thank you. Thank you, Jackie. Oh, hi, Jackie. How's it going? I love this whole Facebook thing. The author is saying, look, if the Melchizedekian priesthood was coming back, then the Levitical priesthood wasn't going to be the priesthood that brought in salvation. Okay? And if the Levitical priesthood wasn't going to be that priesthood, then the law itself wasn't going to be the object of faith forever. Okay? Because if the Levitical priesthood was going to pass, then the law that it was a part of was going to have to pass also. All right? And so he's saying, look, we should have seen this coming. Because we knew there was a Melchizedekian priest coming. So there was going to be something beyond and past the Levitical priesthood and the Levitical law. All right? And we knew the Messiah was going to come from the tribe of Judah. And we knew the Messiah was going to be a Melchizedekian priest. So something different was going to come along. The Levitical priesthood was not the priesthood of salvation. The Levitical priesthood itself was going to be saved because of a Melchizedekian priest. So we knew something else was coming. Verse 15. This becomes even more evident when another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek, whom has become a priest not of the basis of a legal requirement concerning bodily descent, not because he was a descendant of Aaron, but by the power of an indestructible life. For as witness of him, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. For on the one hand, a former commandment is set aside because of its weakness and uselessness, for the law is nothing perfect. But on the other hand, a better hope is introduced through which we draw near to God. And it was not without an oath. Well, and I'll back it up a little bit. I'll handle that one in a second. And he's saying, look, Jesus Christ, he himself, he became a priest after the order of Melchizedek, not because he was a descendant of Aaron, but because he was a righteous man who lived a righteous life. All right? He was able to be a priest because he never needed atonement for sin. Okay? And so, and we knew the Levitical priesthood was going to be set aside, and the law with it, because the Levitical priesthood couldn't save anybody, and it wasn't going to save anybody, and the law couldn't save anybody. But the Melchizedekian priest could. All right? And so that's a better hope, because it's a hope that actually will save us. And in verse 20, it was not without an oath, for those who formerly became priests were made such without an oath. But this one was made a priest with an oath by the one who said to him, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever. So again, like it's the same, like in the same way that God is faithful and God can't lie, so we can trust in the promise given to Abraham. God is faithful, God can't lie. He swore an oath that he was going to make the Messiah a priest after the order of Melchizedek. Okay? And so, like, you know, in the same way that God made the oath to the Abraham was a promise that came through oath. The law was a covenant that came through oath. Jesus' priesthood is the same way. Okay, so he's saying that it is completely superior and no way inferior to the Levitical priesthood. Okay, the Levitical priesthood couldn't save anybody. The law couldn't save anybody. We knew that it was going to. Okay, the Melchizedekian priesthood can save someone. And it's on the basis of Christ's righteous life and the basis of God's promise and oath. Because God said, I'm making a promise, I'm swearing by that promise. Okay? So again, it's superior. All right? And again, verse 22, this makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. All right? Again, the Levitical covenant was not a poor covenant. The law was an object of faith, but it was meant to be a temporary thing until Christ. The Levitical priesthood didn't save anybody. The Levitical priesthood was a representation of what eventually was going to happen with the priesthood of Christ. Okay? And so Christ's Melchizedekian priesthood is greater. All right? And it's got everything that old priesthood had. All right? But in a superior form. All right, so is it possible that one of Jesus' descendants was a descendant of Melchizedek? No, I don't think so. No, I don't. Just because he was a descendant of Abraham, that's good enough. And I don't even know if Melchizedek was a Jebusite or what, but they were wiped out, and the Israelites didn't get along with them. So yeah, I don't think so. Yeah, it could be. I don't know, but and I think that might be something that if it was true, the author of Hebrews would harp on. But I don't think it's the case. And again, and as we just saw here, the reason why Jesus was the order of Melchizedek was because of an indestructible life. He could become after the order of the king of righteousness because he himself was righteous. Like, he become the high priest that eventually would save us because he lived a perfect life. And this was what the author talked about way back there in chapter 2, that Jesus, although he was tempted in all ways that we are, he didn't experience sin. And so because he was that person, he could be the high priest of the order of Melchizedek that brought in true salvation for the people of God. And that became the actual thing that the Levitical priesthood was a picture of. That's why the author is saying this is why Jesus can be the high priest of the order of Melchizedek. Okay. In verse 23, I'm going to keep going here. Yeah, I got 10. The former priests were many in number because they were prevented death for continuing in office. Like, they were going to die, so you needed a new high priest when the old priest died. But he holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. So it's saying, like, Jesus doesn't need a successor because he lives forever. And so every time someone has faith in Christ, Jesus can make intercession before God before them because he's always there. And he is the ultimate priest. And so his ministry, he needs no successors. We don't need any more priests. We don't need any more high priests. We just need one. We have Jesus. For, verse 26, it was indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest, holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. He has no need, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins and those for those of the people, since he did this once for all when he offered up himself. For the law appoints men in their weakness as high priests, but the word of the oath, which came later than law, appoints a son who has been made perfect forever. Okay, and so we hit this. So it's saying, like, look, Jesus is the perfect high priest, holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. He doesn't need to offer sacrifices for his own sin. He doesn't need to offer daily sacrifices for the rest of ours because his one sacrifice was sufficient for all the people. And he points, again, like, the law appoints priests in their weakness, but the word of the oath came later than the law. The prophecy that God was going to swear an oath and appoint the Messiah, priest of the Melchizedek, that came after the law. That was through David in the Psalms. And this appoints a son not a servant, Moses, leaning back, and he's been made perfect forever. And so it's this: Jesus is the superior priest for all these reasons. Okay. No, I don't think it has anything to do with ancestry, even the paternal ancestry aspect. Because even it wasn't Jesus acting like Melchizedek. It was Melchizedek acting like Jesus. Like it's because of this duality that we see in the book of Hebrews that I'm answering Becky's question. That Jesus was tempted in all the ways that we are, but he did it without sin. In doing so, he kind of earned the right to be the high priest of the order of Melchizedek that was to come. Yeah. And like that's the emphasis that the author gives. He doesn't rely on this argument of ancestry, which I mean, it's kind of there, but it's weird in that it'd be Jesus being like Melchizedek, being like Jesus, and so I think it's kind of different. Like it's shooting above that, and it's the fact that there was a prophetic return of that superior priestly order, and it was going to be done in the Messiah. And the reason why he could do it is because he's a human being like us, and he experienced human life like us, but he did it without sin. And because of that, he could be the new high priest of Melchizedek. And he is the perfect high priest that is superior in every way to the Levitical priesthood, which was great and which was needed and was part of the law, but it was foreshadowing, and we're going to find out more as we move on. It's foreshadowing what's coming in Christ. His high priesthood is superior in so many ways, chiefly because it meets every qualification of the Old Testament priesthood. Yeah, it is the priesthood that supersedes that Old Testament priesthood. And it's the priesthood whose ministry is greater because he goes forever. He doesn't need any successors. He doesn't have to do daily sacrifices for sin because he did it once, and that was sufficient. That one actually saved people. And then we move into chapter 8. I got a couple minutes. And he says, now the point in which we're saying is this. Okay, so again, the author, he's summarizing. Okay, he established all this Old Testament stuff, and then he's trying to show this fact that the Melchizedekian priesthood exists, is superior to the Levitical, and Jesus is the new Melchizedekian high priest, and his high priest is superior. So here's the point. We have such a high priest, one who is seated at the right hand of the throne of majesty in heaven, a minister in the holy places, in the true tent that the Lord set up, not man. Okay? And so he's getting into now Jesus's heavenly ministry as high priest. All right? And I think I can only think of like one other place, and this is in Romans 8, where the Bible talks about Jesus' ministry as a priest in heaven, like right now. And Jesus' ministry as a priest in heaven as it relates to circumstances of his death. So that's what we're going to be looking at here in chapters 8, chapters 9, and chapter 10. Okay? And he's going to be relating the Old Testament system of temple sacrifice to the heavenly temple and the heavenly ministry of our Melchizedekian high priest. And so I think this is really neat. I'm looking forward to getting to it. So, but I'm not going to do it right now because I got 5 minutes. But go ahead, again, think about all the stuff we talked about. Think about some questions. And then read 9, 10, read 8, 9, and 10, because we're going to get into this. And it's going to talk about the fact that the reason why there was an earthly tabernacle and an earthly priesthood is because there is a heavenly tabernacle and there's a heavenly priesthood. And we're going to get into that and how all that works with Christ and the ministry of Christ in a way that I think the rest of the Bible doesn't really get into. The rest of the New Testament is just, there's small, it shows up in the Old Testament a couple times. It's really neat. Ezekiel and Isaiah and Elijah. Yeah. Mostly Ezekiel and Isaiah. And some Revelation stuff. So we're going to talk about that next week. I know this is deep stuff, guys. the author of the book said that it was deep stuff. But thank you for sticking out with me. Again, meditate on stuff. I don't know if any of you guys looked up those passages and did some more look at the whole doctrine of apostasy, but when we get to 2 Peter, we'll talk about it again. So we'll look for that. And I'm really looking forward to digging into this heavenly temple, heavenly high priest stuff. I think it's pretty fascinating. And I think it's going to give us some more insight into Christ on the cross, too, and what was going on between his death and resurrection, and interesting things right there. We'll get into a little bit more of that when we get into 1 Peter and 2 Peter stuff too, but we'll talk about it. It'll be cool. All right. I appreciate you guys. Love you guys. Thanks for sticking it out with me. And I'll see you guys all next week. I'll stick around for 3 minutes until we're officially done. If anyone wants to throw anything in the comments. Yeah. And we're probably going to keep doing this. I'm probably going to keep doing this after, like, once we get back in the building, I'll go ahead and live stream when I'm teaching from the building. And that way, people who teach Sunday school, that kind of stuff, can watch it later. People who miss can watch it later. Or people who go to other churches can watch it later if you guys really want to. I don't know. It seems weird to me that people want to, but it is what it is. Yeah. So we probably got like another month, I'm thinking. We'll see. And so we're going to skip James because I did that over the summer when Doug was on a sabbatical. And so if you're trying to think ahead of like what the next book is going to be, the next book is going to be 1 Peter. Okay. So probably within like a month or two, you want to start reading 1 Peter to get ready for that whole discussion. And we'll go from there. Are there many heavenly world? Yeah, I think there's a lot of heavenly worldly parallels. Well, I mean, in a sense, so I think like when it comes to the kingdom of God, there's heavenly parallels. Well, no, even in creation, there's heavenly worldly parallels. Like, because mankind, human beings, are a worldly parallel of God. Like God said, I'm going to make mankind in my own. It's like we were supposed to be, in the same way that God is God over the universe, and that he reigns over the universe, we were supposed to be like God and reign over the earth. And in the same way that like God was going to enter into soulish relationship with human beings, we were supposed to enter into soulish relationships with soulish creation. In the same way that God exercises authority over the physical, non-soulish aspects of the universe, we were supposed to have stewardship over the physical, non-soulish aspects of creation here on earth. So all of creation was set up as a human God parallel. And then the work of redemption, again, is set up that same way. There are the human offices of the Old Testament of patriarchal, pastoral king, priest, and prophet. And those are in representation of the eventual messianic offices. There is a earthly altar. There's only altar. We read about it in Revelation and in Isaiah. There is an earthly holy place in which God dwells. There's a heavenly holy place in which God dwells on the throne. The earthly holy place was surrounded by cherubim. The heavenly holy place is surrounded by cherubim. There's earthly high priests who offer blood sacrifice. We're going to read about it in Hebrews. There's a heavenly high priest that offered sacrifices. There is, like both in creation and in redemption, there is representation on earth that is intended to be representation in heaven. But I think that's just because it's all one thing. God is God. We are made in the image of God. And in order for there to be some of redemption in which God was present and his people came for him, that there had to be an earthly representation. There's a spiritual representation of that because God is present and his people have to come for him. So yeah, I think there's a lot of that. Yeah, we're doing it too, but I'm definitely keeping it. We're going to keep doing it. I love the fact that my aunt and my mom can actually watch my Sunday school class. So, returning the favor. They did this for me for a really long time. Sunday school and youth group and all that jazz. So now I get to do it for them. That's good. All right, it's 10:16, so I'm going to shut this down so church can get started. I haven't heard anything about it being up on YouTube, but if something went wrong with Facebook, they'll put it on and they'll put the links out and everything will be fine. All right, love you guys. Appreciate you guys. Love doing this. Yep. Okay. I'll talk to you guys later. I'm going to end the video. And